Hi, this is Mo Volans for Tuts Plus with another mastering tutorial. I do quite a few of these, but I keep getting asked about it and different angles of mastering and different aspects of mastering. And recently I was working with a client called Ingenieur Music, a couple of really nice lads, and they were asking about how to prep a mix for mastering. So how best they could prepare their mixes to send to me for mastering. I also do mixing for clients, but some clients prefer just to have their stuff mastered, right? So if you're sending your stuff off to a mastering engineer, then you will really need to know what to deliver to them. And even if you're mastering yourself, it's a good idea to have this sort of good practice in place so that you are best prepared for mastering it in a different session, or indeed taking it to a different studio to master. So really, this is for all those people sending away to mastering engineers, or indeed mastering themselves, just preparing for that all-important mastering session. So this piece of music, or well, this project was really for video, for a piece of video, and it's not really like an EDM track or anything, or it's not a house track or whatever, but it's just a piece of music that needs to be prepped to be mastered. And I wanted to sort of show you a couple of tricks and tips and things that you need to do. Some things that, might be tips, and some things that are just absolutely necessary. So first of all, you want to check that everything's playing back correctly. I've already done that. I'm pretty happy with the way things sound. I'm ready for it to go to the mastering session. Then you want to mute off anything you're not using. You can see that I've already muted a few tracks here. So there's some MIDI in there. There's some vocals that aren't getting used. And there's like a bounce track that I'm not using. So make sure that everything that's in is supposed to be in. It sounds pretty obvious, but you don't want something popping up in the master once you've paid for it that wasn't meant to be there. So just triple check this stuff. And then probably the next most important step is to start to look at the mix. And this is a reasonably complex mix. I mean, it's not, it's not hundreds of tracks or anything, but it's one thing that is reasonably complex about it is there's a lot of automation, right? So you can see all these reeds here. And what this means is I can't really change the level. So if there's something in here that you need to change the level on, we'll need to group it. And I'll come back to that in a second. Looking at the master output here, I'm just going to get rid of this plugin because I know it's not being used. There's quite a few things. Let's have a look at what's on here. There's some mastering compression, a native instruments passive EQ, Brainworks stuff, and some limiting. Okay, so what I was probably doing is running a basic mastering process, either to send it to somebody or to hear what it's going to sound like with some basic mastering on it. This all needs to be switched off. It's imperative. So, I mean, this is with it on. Let's play it back. And let's switch it off. Obviously a lot quieter, and in my mind sounds better. That mastering stuff there was really just sort of slapdash, I think, just to send it out. The next thing to look at is headroom, and luckily in this mix, and this might have been, I might be able to thank my past self for this, I mixed it with this in mind to make sure there's headroom. And this is the best practice, is to go through your mix and ensure that you've got sort of 2 or 3 dB of headroom minimum, really. With there being no real noise floor in digital systems and masses of headroom, of course you can clip the output. Again, this is a best practice thing. Good practice thing. I wouldn't really suggest it. There's no need to. But you can have a reasonably low output. I've had masters sent to me that are very, very low and end up sounding great. I've had masters sent to me that are clipped and really they have to go back. So I would suggest, if anything, more headroom is better. Just plenty of headroom. And the same on the main channels. So let's sort of play it back again at the loudest point. Nothing really should be clipping. I mean, it's not gonna, break your mix if it is, but again, unless it's a creative thing, there's really no need for it. There's plenty of headroom. There's plenty of room for scope here. There's plenty of scope for movement. I would suggest, making sure that everything's just working nicely. And this will reflect in the master output. Now, if you did have some clipping in the master out, and you know, of course you can just bring the master output down, right? Like this, you know, it's not ideal. So, you know, what you really should do is sort of select things, group them, and then turn those down. And this is the best way to do it if you've got lots of automation. So you would grab a group of instruments. You could send them to a new bus, right? I'm not going to mess this mix up, but you could send them to a new bus and then mix these buses. So say you could have 8 of them at the end. So you could have drums, bass, synths, and you could mix those. And that would probably be the best way to do it. And then you could balance them and create a reasonable level on the master output. Now, once that's all done and you've got those turned off on the master, you want to select the area that you want to export. Now, this is another important trick for you, or another important tip that mastering engineers love, is to have a bit of a buffer. Because realistically, if you start your master from, you know, the very, very beginning, and there's some very low frequency stuff at the beginning of this one, you might not be able to hear it. But say you do, and there's a click or a pop right at the start, there's not much you can do. And sometimes when you export from DAWs, you know, you do get that. So it's a good idea just to put a couple of bars buffer in the beginning. You know, it's really easy for us to trim that section. It's not really easy to take a problem out that's imprinted into the audio at the start. So I would suggest doing that, and I would suggest doing the same at the end. This track just runs out. It's really just a demo for a bit of video, but say this was the end of your track. I would just put a couple of bars or longer in at the end. And then we're pretty much ready to export. Now, when we do this, this is sort of the final thing you want to think about. What's the master engineer asked for, or what do you need to use to master? You know, what's the correct format for you? Now, I would suggest going as high as possible. If you've been recording and working at 24-bit 44.1, and that's what I work at, say you work at 24-bit 96, say you've been working at that, then I would stick at that. I would leave it at exactly the resolution that you've been working at. So for argument's sake, we've been working at that. I would leave it. I wouldn't go down to 16-bit at this point because I would need to dither it, which is a process we used from moving from higher bit depths to lower bit depths. I wouldn't do that because then you would have to master in 16-bit. Your mastering plugins would only be working at 16-bit resolution. You would obviously lose headroom and everything else. So I would leave it at 24-bit and then dither right at the end. Format, audio interchange file format or WAV, you know, ask the mastering engineer. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference. Most people can use both, but some engineers prefer one. Definitely ask. And then all sorts of normalization off. As long as we've double, tripled, quadruple checked that headroom on the master out, we should be good. So normalize off and then include audio tail. Basically, if you've got reverb and everything else and it rings out at the end of your track, the last thing you want it to do is cut off 2 seconds. I know we've left a buffer, but let's say for argument's sake, we've left a smaller buffer and the reverb cuts off at the end of that right locator region. Now, if it does that, you can introduce a fade, but it might sound unrealistic. So just leave that in, and then offline bounce is fine as long as you've got no hardware running or anything. No dithering, interleave file. We're all good to go. That's great. I'm going to bounce it onto the desktop, let it go, and the file that we end up with should look like a nice dynamic pre-master with plenty of headroom at 24-bit with nothing on the master out and just really ready to go with nice buffers at the end of the start. And this is good practice for handing off to mastering engineers and even using in different projects for yourself for mastering. Now I'm going to just come away from this video, come back and show you the exported result, and we'll just take a look and check that it's A-OK. Okay, so here we are in Soundtrack Pro, and don't worry if you've not got Logic or Soundtrack Pro, by the way. I just wanted to mention this before I go any further. This is really generic advice. So whether you're in Cubase, Reason, Ableton, or whether you use Wavelab or whatever else, this can be achieved in all of them. So here we are. Yeah, I just opened it in a dedicated sound editor, really, just so you can see it. But there's just plenty of headroom. I mean, this is great. There's loads and loads of headroom. There's no noise, and there's a buffer at the start, and there's a massive buffer at the end. Now, I hear problems in that straight away that I need to fix in mastering. Far too much low end. I'd probably go back to the mix and fix any problems. And at this point, it's a good idea. You come away from your mix, you listen to it in a different setting. And, if you hear any problems at this point, go back to the mix, fix them, and then re-export. There's no reason why you can't do that. It's not set in stone at this point. But this end here, you'll hear the pad sound ring out there. And it rings out for a long time, you see. So this went out probably over our buffer, still ringing. Then it gives us the opportunity to fade it exactly where we want. And the beginning should start nicely. And even at the loudest points, we've got loads of headroom. It's great. It's great to have loads of headroom. Nice and dynamic. It's all good. So there you go. That's pretty much, a good way, at least one way, my way, to prep for mastering. And if I got files like this, maybe this is a little quiet, but if I got a file like this, maybe a little louder, I'd be really happy to go ahead with the mastering job. And I'm sure most mastering engineers would be. But what I'd say is double check with them, double check with people that you're working with, and just be careful with your dynamics, really. So hopefully this has helped you if you are looking to prep your stuff ready for a final master. And if you've got any ideas for tutorials or anything you'd like to see, as always, leave a comment and I'll try to add it to my to-do list. So bye for now.